situated here really quick, and then we will begin. I'll give it like a couple more seconds. Okay, so hello, welcome everybody. We're so excited that you guys have joined us to learn more about womanism and to listen to our panelists give their insight on the topic. We will be hearing from Dr. Paulette Cross and Dr. Chandra Walker. If you will, we would love for each of you to take a minute or two to introduce yourselves to the audience. So you guys can do that now.
I'm Dr. Paulette Cross. I'm out of the College of Education. I can't believe it. This is my 6th year at Georgia College. I have, of course, my PhD, but I have a degree in African American Studies, and a large part of that is Black feminism and womanism. My dissertation, in fact, was done on both.
Good afternoon. My name is Shaundra Walker. I am the library director here at Georgia College, and I think I'm in my 10th year here, not consecutive, but I think I'm coming up on 10 years. My bachelor's degree is in history with a concentration in United States and African American history from Spelman College. I also have a master's in library and information studies from Clark Atlanta University, and my PhD is in educational leadership with the focus on higher education administration from Mercer University. And I am just delighted to be here with you all this afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yes, thank you guys so much for being here and taking time out of your days to join us. We're really excited to hear what you guys have to say. And so before we begin, we ask that the audience keeps their comments and questions to themselves just to protect our panelists. But if you have any questions, we have a website that I will put in the comments in a few minutes. And you can find more information there about womanism. And so, yeah, our moderators for the event today are going to be 2 of my group members, Maddie and Ashley, and they will help guide the conversation. And so with that being said, we are going to just jump right in.
All right, guys, so if you knew about womanism, like previous to this event, we just wanted to know, would you consider yourself a womanist, and what does womanism mean to you?
I'll let Dr. Cross, if you would like to go first, or I can, whatever you prefer.
Good. Okay, I will. I'm seeing all this writing. Just a second here. It's saying unmute myself. So you guys can hear me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I do consider myself a womanist, but I'm also a Black feminist. And I don't know if we understand the difference between the two. Some people think you could use it interchangeably, but for me, I like to say that womanism is like humanitarianism. It's interest, in all people. I mean, when Alice Walker came out with that, it just seemingly fits me, because I am interested in everyone, even though I am Black and a feminist.
So I would agree with Dr. Cross. I was first exposed to the concept of womanism as an undergraduate student at Spelman College. It's a historically Black liberal arts college for women, and that's where I first became acquainted with womanism. I would agree again with Dr. Cross. I do see myself in that vein. Being at Spelman was a very rich experience for me, because they center everything that they do within the experience of Black women. And to have that experience at such a young age, it was very influential to me, and has had a great influence on my life and the way that I approach my life and work. So, yeah.
Amazing. I guess that leads us right into our next question. Do you think that the feminist movement, sometimes with or without meaning to purposefully, discredits, ignores, doesn't talk enough about the struggles of women of color specifically?
Yes, it's kind of a hard answer, but I I do believe that we really need to think about how it was created, where it existed, the history of it, right? I'd like to go back to the history, because the only reason why we have womanism is because Black feminists weren't part of the movement, because and I'm specifically talking about race, right? And I want to go back all the way to the Sojourner Truth. Are we all familiar with Sojourner Truth? Ain't I a woman? Back in the, I want to say it's the late 1700s, right? At the convention when she was excluded. And from that point on, we do have a history of Black feminists being excluded, or their issues, their lived experiences not being recognized, acknowledged, part of the movement.
Yeah, just to piggyback on Dr. Cross's comments, I'm actually doing some research on a Black suffragist from Hancock County. Her name is Adela Hunt Logan. She was born in Sparta in Hancock County. But anyway, she was a lady principal at Tuskegee Institute and was the first librarian at Tuskegee. That's my interest in her. But in reading about her, she's talking about the unique perspectives of Black women and some of the contrasts that Black women who were looking for the vote and looking for elevation had with white suffragists at the same time, and how some of their needs and their concerns were very different. And so I think there was a real focus on elevating Black women, but also elevating the race of Black people, and that was missing. And so that was a work that she and her colleagues, Margaret Murray Washington and some other Black women in that area, were looking to do. And so I think we see very early on some really distinct needs, maybe not necessarily being met, and very unique perspectives there that perhaps were not represented within the larger feminist movement that Black women felt were really necessary to speak to. So
I can do that. And I'd like to add to the Combahee River Collective that included gay and lesbian women.
Exactly.
Speaking of history, in more recent times, specifically the Black Lives Matter movement last year and continuing on to this year, how do you think recent events surrounding racial and gender inequality are affecting the womanism movement? Is it helping it? Is it hurting it? Is the conversation progressing?
I don't know about whether or not it's a hindrance. What I know is the focus, when we think about the Black Lives Matter movement, and we think about, for example, police brutality, and in terms of the men and women, the men, are more focused on men than women. And I do think that sometimes maybe Black feminism, womanism gets lost in the whole conversation. But I think that's a direct relationship to this notion of race or ethnicity, and how it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So I don't know, Dr. Walker, if
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking, one of the things that I think gets lost when there are discussions about Black Lives Matter is that the movement was actually started by a couple of Black women. And it's interesting to me when I hear people share their various opinions on it, that, as it being violent and other things like that. And there seems to just be a lack of knowledge around how it originated. As Dr. Cross was saying, even in this movement that was started by two Black women, when you think about some of the cases around police brutality that many people are familiar with, there are cases about Black men. And you don't hear a lot about people like Sandra Bland or, some of the other Black women who have been unfortunate victims of some of this police brutality and other injustices in our criminal justice system. And so I think I'm kind of on the fence there. it's interesting. I'll just leave it there. It is very interesting to sit back and to observe.
And I think it also connects to the patriarchal effect of how things are constructed here in our society when it comes to, let's just use the university as an institution. And so how many classes right now off the top of your head, where could you go and get a class on Black feminism, womanism, feminism? So it does get lost in the whole realm of things, right?
Mhm.
And I also just did want to add, you said like there are some examples. A big one in like pop culture is Breonna Taylor and what happened to her. And obviously it's spoken about a lot on social media, but something that me and my group members talked about also is because there's such a focus on what happens to African-American men in terms of police brutality, it's like, but at home, who's waiting for them? It's the women. And who is worrying about them? It's the women. And so I feel like that conversation also sometimes gets lost in the whole, politics of it and everything else. So thank you for sharing on that. And I'll let Ashley go.
Right, so kind of branching off from like the Black Lives Matter movement, like do y'all see any societal differences between the way men of color and women of color are treated?
I don't, that's like putting us at odds against each other, which I think we have to be conscious of, right? It's one of the things that in terms of being a Black feminist or that we grapple with, including our men.
Mhm.
I think one of the distinctions between white feminists and Black feminists is the fact that from my perspective, I don't know if I'm correct, you guys will tell me, but when I was studying all this, white women disassociated themselves from their men. That was a very big part of the feminist movement. But Black feminism, we're inclusive. And so because of the structure of our society, oftentimes we are juxtaposed against each other. And from a woman's perspective, we're all inclusive, right? We want to acknowledge and be a part of men, women, people of color, people not of color. I mean, that's what Alice Walker was propagating, right? We're all one. This unity. So I kind of pause, or I'm slow to kind of
Yeah.
deal with that question, Dr.
I think that certainly, you're talking about a different gender but same race, so the experiences are different, but I don't think there's necessarily a hierarchy, because at the end of the day, I think we're all Black, and so there are some very unique ways that we experience the world around that Blackness, um, regardless of our gender identity. And so, I agree with Dr. Cross. You want to be really careful about positioning us as opposite or in competition with each other, or that there's any kind of hierarchy. I think just that commonality is something that we can unite around, regardless of whether we're men or women or how we choose to identify.
Do you think that certain portrayals of women of color in media, TV, movie, songs, music, whatever, help or harm the womanism movement?
Anything stereotypical. I remember I took a class and my students had this conversation about good stereotypes. I just don't have I just think when we stereotype, it's kind of not good. So, oh gosh, how do I say this diplomatically? Dr. Walker, what are you thinking? And first, repeat the question again, and then Dr. Walker, because I'm having a little bit of difficulty with this one.
It's all right. Take your time. The question was, do you think that certain portrayals of women of color in media, TV, movie, etc., help or harm the womanism movement, or do any specifically come to mind?
So I think while I'm going to give Dr. Cross an opportunity to prepare what I'm sure is going to be an excellent response. But I think, when you think about representations of Black women in popular media, there often is not a lot of knowledge about how Black women have been represented historically. And so what might look a certain way to someone who may not be knowledgeable about some of the historical stereotypes that have, unfortunately, Black women have been subject to, it may be challenging to really understand how and where to place some of the media representations of Black women. And I'll specifically talk now about women like Meg Thee Stallion and Cardi B and some of hip hop artists and that kind of thing. I think it can look one way, it can look hypersexualized, it can look to be very problematic. But on the flip side of that, African American women and their sexuality has always been a controversial, difficult topic. And so, I see some of what they do as an attempt to reclaim and control that sexuality that in a way that we haven't always been able to do as Black women. But I think others, and I'm coming from a very particular perspective, but I think other people may see it differently. And I don't think also, and this is nothing against Meg Thee Stallion or Cardi B or, Beyonce or anybody, I'm not sure if they're always aware of the significance of some of the things that they are doing. But that is kind of sort of how I see them in many ways, this sort of reclaiming something that has been taken away from you and owning it. But others may see it differently. So.
And so thank you, that helped me, Dr. Walker, because I'm going to go back to stereotyping and how with media, and let's use commercials for an example, how we see the stereotyping of Black women only in a certain way in many of the cases, right? Hair is a big issue that seems to be, every time I look at an article that someone's cut off somebody's hair, or because it's not understood, and phenotype, right? I just and so what comes to mind for me, and not only Alice Walker but Toni Morrison and some of the writings that she has, The Bluest Eye in particular. And how in mainstream media, we seem to have a penchant for reproducing stereotypes, maybe from a dominant culture's perspective of how Black women or Black people are represented. So I think that's a very difficult one for me. Thank you, Dr. Walker.
When was the first time you recognized how your identity impacts how you navigate the world?
As a Black woman, Black child, being Black in school, in high, okay. I went from K through 12th grade. I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm in Los Angeles currently. I teach in Georgia, so I'll be back home in Georgia in a few months. But my lived experience has been in the northeastern part of Pennsylvania, K through 12. Didn't go to my high school prom. I was the only Black girl in my class in most of those times. So for me, when you're young, you don't have a vocabulary, perhaps not even an understanding of who you are. I knew I was colored at the time. I have carried many of my grandmother's stories with me. But I think the first time I realized who I was, so much happens in college. As an undergraduate, taking my first, class about Blacks, African-American class, and then also taking a women's studies class. So I think that was the time, a freshman in high school, college.
I would say that my growing up experience was probably very different from Dr. Cross's experience. I was born and raised here in Georgia, and I grew up in a really close-knit African American community that was very affirming. I attended virtually from maybe after second grade or so. My schools were all Black, majority Black, more than 90% Black. My teachers were African American. My community was African American. So in all honesty, it was a very affirming experience for me, um, both in my nuclear family as well as school and community. I think I also went to HBCUs for my undergraduate and my MLIS, and so I think I really became very conscious of my identity as a Black woman. I was introduced to it, of course, in a very more formal way when I was an undergrad. But coming into the workforce for me was um, interesting, I will say, in terms of how I noticed how differently I was perceived than I had been perceived in my community and in the educational settings where I had been. And so I became much more conscious and aware of how Black women in particular are perceived. And so it gave me a great sensitivity in terms of how I moved through the world and how others, the kinds of assumptions and beliefs that people have about you and your ability and what your lived experience has been. Um, Coming into the work world really brought that into focus for me personally.
And kind of piggybacking off of that question, what lessons did you learn about womanhood at a young age because of your identity, or that were a little bit different than kids or people around you?
I did. I did have lots of lessons learned because my dissertation is about my family, and I'm from a closely knit family. But of course, when you're in certain parts of the Northeast and there aren't any, the dominant culture is real dominant. And I came from a population of maybe 75,000 people and 500 Black families. So it's important. Your church culture is important because that's where, and then your family and the reunion. So I've come from a culture that I felt very good and really took in my grandmother's stories, which is what my dissertation is based on, about Jim Crow and being in Virginia, right? Migrating to Pennsylvania across the Mason-Dixon line. So, I knew that I had to get an education. I personally I'm from a small city. I wanted to get to the big city, going to New York I have an aunt in New York. She is probably a key person that's responsible for me being who I am, because New York is progressive. Harlem, coming from Pennsylvania every summer to visit this aunt and walking the streets of Harlem, it was just a whole thing. So I thought when I graduated from high school, I would be living in New York. Well, that aunt migrated to LA, where I am. And so my junior year in high school, this is where I am. But LA was different in terms of diversity, because it's just not only Blacks, a very, very multicultural kind of city. So that was another whole thing for me. But the lessons I learned, the stories of my grandmothers and great-grandmothers and great-great-grandmothers are things that provided me a framework to want a better life. I guess that's why I'm an educator today. I never would have thought that looking back at those years, but I'm sure that's responsible. They're responsible for who I am today.
Yeah, and I just echo Dr. Cross's comments. I think my strongest examples of womanhood come from the women in my family, people like my mother, my grandmothers, my great grandmothers, my aunts, women in my community. They were very influential to me. Seeing how hard they worked, they were very hard working women, but also very community oriented. Maybe often didn't have a whole lot of financial resources, but were very interested in community uplift and community outreach. And so that's been something that has been really, really influential, I would say, to me as well, just the women in my family and the women in my community.
Well, you kind of already answered this, but the next question was, who defines womanhood for you? And I feel like you guys have talked about it a little bit, but if there was anyone else that you wanted to quickly mention, now you can.
I had good mentors, and as a freshman, I think that's the other part of it, the academic side. I had good mentors, good Black females, educators, as well as males that gave me a bird's eye view and gave me the support and the mentorship I needed to go the next step, which I am an educator now, but I was at that time, I didn't know. I mean, I was looking at I'm an administrator, basically. I switched careers, right? So I thought I would be breaking the glass ceiling in that respect. But as it turned out, they provided this great groundwork for me to be who I am and doing what I'm doing right now.
Yes, I would also be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the educators. You know, as I mentioned when I was talking earlier, I went to majority Black schools basically for my whole life. And I was never in an environment where I was made to feel as if I was not capable or deficient or had deficits. And if those things were seen in me, the people around me were smart enough or considerate enough not to let me know, I was made to feel as if I could do anything. And so my teachers, particularly my high school teachers, my English and science teachers and math teachers in particular, stand out to me as people who were just really influential and had extremely high expectations on me. And it made me feel as if I could do anything that I set my mind to. And I'm very thankful to have had that experience as in those formative years, because it's really shaped me and influenced me as an adult.
So you guys have already talked about kind of what groups you feel more comfortable in and growing up and your experiences and stuff like that. And we have read this week about Alice Walker and some of her works, which are so educational and so enlightening. And one of the quotes that we wanted to mention that stuck out to us is, she says, one of the goals of womanism is to acknowledge the theft of wisdom female and dark mother leadership might provide. And so that kind of spoke to us, and how it's like a disservice to not represent all kinds of people in important spaces. So kind of leading off of that, the question, what change do you think there would be if women of color, specifically Black women, were included in all spaces such as politics or science or whatever it may be?
I think it would make a big difference. I think the world would be a more globally would be a more peaceful place. Like women have a different way of handling things. And I think one of the things for Black feminists and womanists is this ethics of caring. I think, have you guys read Noddings? No, Noddings. But in Black feminism and womanism has a like what am I saying? Like not theory, but tenet, right? Caring means everything. Caring is love. And I think the mere fact of the way that women do things, we do things, in another way. We're not, I won't say we're not aggressive, but not aggressive in terms of men. I have a male son. And now that he's grown and I'm grown, I have to be very careful of how I navigate conversations, because they really are alpha dogs, right? they go right in there. And so I think the world we would get a lot more accomplished because our main goal here is unity. eliminating the domination, right? All the matrices, the intersections of race, class, gender, and just accepting, moving all those oppressions and accepting each other as is. And Alice Walker does such a good job in so the Mother's Garden. What is it? Her Mother's Garden book. But also Phillips in her Womanism. Have you all read that? And Patricia Hill Collins talk in great detail about eliminating those oppressions so that we can all sit at the table. We all basically have a seat at the table. And I just think that if women were more involved in all these aspects of our daily lives, that we would see, you know, more change and more egalitarian ways, right? Because we remove that the power dynamics. I mean, think about, we're all here right now. We happen to be the speakers, but we're on an even keel here, right? We're talking about womanism, we're talking about feminism, and we all have a seat at this table. And I think that when we all have a seat at the table, we're just more equally represented, the power dynamics are moved, and we can have a real conversation and get things done and raise a consciousness among us here at this table, right? So, I mean, I'm talking too much, Dr. Walker.
No, everything that you said was great. And as you were talking, I was really reflecting on the events of, I guess, the past year or so, or, you know, you could kind of sort of carry it back a little bit further. I think Black women in particular have been very central to a lot of the activism that we have seen in our country. Were it not for the groundwork and the work that Black women had put in place, I don't think we would have seen some of the difficult conversations and discussions that we have been forced to have over these past few months, or depending on how far you want to take it back. And so I think if you expand that, if there are more opportunities, I think as Dr. Cross has shared, there's a great deal of sensitivity and some of the things that we talked about previously in terms of community building and bringing in others and enlarging the table. I think you would see a lot more of that. I've been really inspired by the work of Black women always, but particularly as of late. And so I think we would see more people at the table.
So how do you think that white feminists can begin to understand the experiences of Black women? And do you think that pop culture, like music, like Beyonce's album Lemonade, or like Brown Skin Girl, is like helping other people to understand like the experiences of Black women?
I do. Let me say that with the Black Lives Matter movement going global, I mean, we know that it was George in the last year, George Floyd's murder kind of gave it national, international recognition. But we all who know our history, the history of Black lives, the history from the very beginning of us enslaved peoples coming to this country, we know that this is, for Black, this is nothing new. It's been going on and on and on. Well, Black Lives Matter movement started, and correct me if I'm not, articulating this in the right way, but it started out of a response to police brutality and police violence. So it's been existing, I want to say the early 2000s, 2010s, right? The teens. They've been working to do this. And now this past year just reached this international kind of focus. I believe that now, because of this movement, Black Lives Matter, many white women understand what it means when you walk in someone else's shoes. I'll put it that way. It's hard to understand someone else's experiences. Really, it may be difficult. but I do believe that because of this movement, because of the media attention, because of now what happened with George Floyd, we get to learn about all these other people who have been murdered, men and women. And I am proud to say Georgia College did that tribute that starts, well, it maybe ends with Emmett Till. Emmett Till and I probably are the same age. I was a little girl when that happened, a teenager, or, you know, preteen when that happened. But we know that this has been going on and on and on. So white women are melding in this whole process, right? They're melding in the movement and understanding it. And when white women understand things, they're telling their husbands, we have to make that connection, and their children and grandparents. So it's taking on. I do believe there's a beginning to truly understand what social justice or racial justice is all about. But I think that in terms of educators and our allies, we could reach out, we can do more to raise consciousness in all aspects of our life.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with what Dr. Cross has shared here today. I think, you know, the beauty of the past year or so is that it's been so consistent, and in a way, you know, if you think of these isolated incidents, so, you know, Black Lives Matter sort of kicked off with the Tamir, Trayvon Martin, and some murders of, you know, children or whatever, but it was these very easy to see these things as isolated incidents. But I think the strength of the movement that kind of elevated last year was so persistent, and everywhere you turn, you know, you could not get away from it in a way that you have been able to distance yourself from it in the past. And so I think it has raised the level of consciousness in a way that I think for some people has made them feel uncomfortable, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. Like, you know, if that's what it takes to get your attention, but it's like you could not get away from it. You turn on your news every single day for weeks and somebody is protesting. And so I think it has helped to sensitize people to the plight and the experiences of Black people and Black women. You know, as you shared earlier, when we have things like police brutality or mass incarceration in our community, it is often Black women who are left behind in those communities, raising the children and dealing with those issues. And so I think, again, there's a great potential for more consciousness and awareness of what that actually is like, you know, what that experience is like. And some people who may not have been sensitive to it in the past now have a really unique opportunity to engage with these topics, to make the connections, as Dr. Cross indicated. You know, it didn't start with Trayvon Martin. It didn't start with Emmett Till. You know, we're talking about hundreds of years of oppression here. And so I think the length of this conversation has allowed people, hopefully, to develop a sensitivity and awareness and a consciousness about this issue in a way that they have not before. So
I want to applaud you all for doing this, because I don't know how many people are on this Zoom, but I know that the majority of them must be the dominant culture. And just that fact alone of having a platform like this really, really raises the consciousness. I mean, the difference in what's happening now and the civil rights movement is the civil rights movement. There might have been a few Jews and a couple of whites, but most of those people in that movement were Black, right? Look at what's happening now. When you see pictures of Black Lives Movement, you're just not seeing just Black folks, right? When you look at the clips for the international, really made me proud. All those different countries. And what do you see coming together? All sorts of people, all sorts of ethnicities, right? Wanting equality, racial equality. So.
So like y'all said, like obviously like people that aren't in the Black community like can't really fully understand the experiences that y'all face. but like, how can we become allies to women of color, and why should everyone become a womanist?
Well, I mean, being a woman is being a transformational, because you're automatically thinking about this humanitarianism or humanism, right? This effort to bring us all together as people. And as I said, and I'll just let Dr. Walker say more about it, but I think having a platform like you guys will make wonderful allies. I know, and I don't think I'm being presumptuous, that when you leave this talk today, for those people that might be, have questions or think that this is questionable, or maybe the naysayers and non-believers, it really is a realistic. Many people have been dying simply because of their phenotype, been brutalized for centuries just because of that. So if you're interested in social justice and being allies, now the time is right now, because there are many opportunities to do this. And as I mentioned, I applaud you all. This is a first step, having that conversation.
So there is a little acronym that I have used in the past in talking about allyship. I've had conversations with librarians in particular around these issues, because even though people don't think of the library as being a particular political or social force, I believe that it is. And the acronym goes like this: is ally. The A is for always center the impacted. L, listen and learn from those who live in oppression. Leverage your privilege, and then yield the floor. And I think it's the nice, succinct guiding principles about how people can be allies, using your voice, using your resources, using your platform, speaking up when you see something that is not quite right. Using your influence. I think centering the lives of the people, of the oppressed people, the people who are actually having the experiences, and then of course yielding the floor. Kind of sort of knowing when to step back and when to step up, and how to best use your position to advance the cause. So, but as Dr. Cross shared, what you've done today here, I'm sure has been very educational, and people have learned a lot. And it is a platform that you have. And so I applaud you for what you've put on here today. It's been wonderful to share with you and to have this experience with you. So kudos to you and to your instructor for this idea. I've really enjoyed participating and sharing with you all today.
Yes, thank you so much. We're going to start to close it down just so other students can get to their 3:30 classes if they need to. But if you guys have any like closing remarks or comments that you would like to leave us off with, we are just, again, so incredibly thankful that you guys took the time out. And I hope that everybody really took something new away from this. And yeah, but if you guys have any closing remarks, that would be great. And if not, again, we just thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to share that I haven't shared already. But again, just thank you for this opportunity to share and be with you all today. And again, kudos to you and your instructor for putting this event together. I really enjoyed participating. So thank you.
Yeah, I ditto Dr. Walker, and I would encourage you all to have these courageous conversations.
I just want to say thank you very much.
Yes, thank y'all for participating in our event.
Any questions? Anybody have a comment or a question? We'd love to have someone end it with.
I was gonna say, I wrote in the chat when y'all were talking about prisons and women being the primary caretakers at home. When Baldwin County, I mean, if you go into our prisons, you'll see that the majority of the workforce is Black women. And to me, it's sort of like an ethical, like that would be a nightmare to have to police your own men. I just wondered if you thought anything about that. That may be way out of your, I know it's out of your expertise, but I've just been thinking about it a lot. And when I teach corrections, there's no section on Black women in prison or as employees.
Well, I think that sort of says a lot about the community dynamics that, you know, the Black men cannot come and work at the prison because they're in the prison, and that the Black women are those people who are left behind. And it also kind of sort of goes back to this whole prison industrial complex as well. So yeah, that's the initial thought that I have. It's like, who's left, but also what and why is the prison industrial complex driving the economy in this community? It's probably like a larger conversation, like why aren't there other opportunities why are the Black men there, and why aren't there other opportunities for the Black women? And we all know that those are very typically low paying jobs with a very high turnover rate. So I think it says a lot about the position of Black women within the community, that those are the opportunities that are available to them, and that they're overrepresented in that workforce.
And I would recommend, Sarah, Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. Okay, that would be very helpful.
I include that in class, but it's just something I've noticed through doing some service work in prison. It was just something I've noticed, and I hadn't looked up other data, but yeah, Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow is excellent. Thank you both for coming and talking about it. I loved the conversation.
Thank you for having us. Really enjoyed it myself.
Yes, agreed.
Okay, so I guess that concludes our event. So you are welcome to leave the event. But yeah, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.